Thanks much, JW. Appreciate the introduction. And thanks for those that are going to be able to help keep up with the questions in chat. There may be questions that we have to table for follow-up later on, but hopefully we'll be able to get to everything. We're going to try not to bore you too much with slide content. We'll break in the middle for a little bit of interactive activity, and we'll talk a little bit more. We're going to get started here. Let me just take control. Dun, dun, dun. All right, so call record insights, right? Platform. Thankfully, Andy and Justin are with me today, two of the founding architects of the solution that we're going to kind of talk about. I'll be super transparent to tell you that while we're going to focus on the call records, the insights component is probably a little bit more specific and maybe up to you and your organization on how you want to drive insights from the data that gets exposed through call record insights. And we'll talk a little bit more about the components that are involved in kind of the structure of a record and so forth, and again, get into some kind of live records. But thanks, Andy and Justin, for joining today. We're going to talk about the platform itself, when it meets your needs for an organization, when it might not meet your needs, and some of the other kind of third-party options that are out there if for whatever reason call record insights isn't going to meet your needs. Some additional links that kind of maybe help you get started, help you along the journey. And then again, we're going to go into kind of some record examples just with basic PSTN calls, what a meeting looks like, and kind of what some of the field definitions are, right? So we called this a level 300 class in the registration. And it's probably a level 300 class because the topic itself can be complex, right? The topic of a records database structure, how things move from graph through the call record insights application itself into the Custo database. It can be rather technical in nature, but we're gonna stick to probably somewhere between 200 and 300 level, just so that we don't lose everybody. Some folks are probably familiar with the Graph API and what components in a Teams call record, whether it be a meeting or a person-to-person call, what's available. And some folks may have really unfamiliar. So we'll try to kind of bridge those gaps, encourage you to get started and start to get familiar with the data itself. And then as Jonathan mentioned, we may do some follow-up sessions in the future to kind of take this even further as we get your feedback and get your questions and so forth. So a little bit of an architectural view here. The image on the left-hand side and the link at the top, we're using PowerPoint Live, so for folks that want to either cut and paste, grab the link at the top. Call Record Insights is a collaborative set of Azure infrastructure components that connect to Graph API and take Teams call records from the API into a flattened format that's stored in Cosmos DB, accessible through Azure Data Explorer. Image on the left is maybe a little small for the screen, but feel free to go to the GitHub deployment. I want to be real clear that Call Record Insights isn't a product you buy. It's not a license you enable. It is an establishment of components that take advantage of existing capabilities, call record endpoint information from Graph API through an Azure Function app, leveraging, drawing a blank. Leveraging different components to basically surface those. And the important part that we're going to focus on the right-hand side of the graph is the structure of a record itself, because those of you that come from the traditional PBX world, right, and you're used to, maybe a standard Avaya, standard Cisco record that is specific to like PSTN or extension-based calls, Call Record Insights and the cloud-based capabilities of Teams manage the call records in a different set of structures by stream. And so the image on the right-hand side kind of gives you at least a little bit of a visual representation of how we progress from a record into a stream and then the different modalities that are available in a call record. When we say call record, right, it includes meetings, and meetings can have multiple participants joining with multiple endpoint types, whether it be the Teams client, PSTN endpoints, and so forth. And so we have to break that structure down and flatten the records. So we'll talk a little bit more as we get into the live demonstration today about how that image on the right-hand side and the structure provided by Graph API gets broken out and what you'll actually see once the record is flattened into a database. So kind of covered this. Again, the most important, I think, scenario here that I like to speak to is the flattening of the record. And what flattening really means is the fact that a particular call modality might have different fields populated based on the join type. And the example that I'll show you when we get further into the demonstration here is, for instance, a PSTN endpoint. There are things that we know about a PSTN endpoint and things we don't know about a PSTN endpoint, versus when a user inside your tenant places a call or joins a meeting from within Teams, there's more data that's available to us because of what's provided by the Teams client through the Graph API. So we understand things like UPN, caller display name, or even, the codec that's being used. And so you'll see in the record examples that we get to, we're flattening those records into a single row. And then for each call type, you'll see that there are multiple rows because we drive records into streams. I do want to talk a little bit about the fact that this was it's a solution developed by Microsoft, but it's been deployed through the GitHub community. Andy and Justin and others are already contributing, and I think Andy at some point here is going to be able to speak to kind of some release information that's coming up. But I want to be clear, it's not a product you buy, right? It's not something you're going to contact your account team and reach out and say, I'd like to buy licensing for Call Record Insights. It takes advantage of components that are available to you and your organization through an Azure subscription. Primarily, again, from that diagram, right, we talk about the Custo database, we talk about the Event Hub component, there's a Function app component in the Graph API, which lives on the backside that provides the source of the data that gets stuffed into the call record itself. But it's a community solution available through GitHub. For sure, we'll be sharing the links so you can get familiar with the GitHub. I might even pivot to the GitHub so we can navigate that itself. And the important part is that the scripting that Andy and Justin have put together, right, it's a deployable PowerShell script that deploys all of the components that you need to establish an implementation of Call Record Insights. In general, the deployment takes anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes, maybe sometimes 30 minutes for the script to run through, establish all the components like service principals and the database components and all that. But it is easy to deploy through the script, and we'll show a little bit about what an example of that looks like. And then the other thing that I just recommended on this particular slide here is, if you take a look, let me grab my little laser pointer. When we get out to the GitHub, you can follow the GitHub so that you get notifications for feedback, questions that are being asked by the community itself, and when there are feature and product updates to Call Record Insights, you'll be able to get those notifications. So. All right. Before we dive into the actual solution itself, I put together a little bit of a when it fits and when it might not fit for your organization. Largely, I work with customers that are very interested in the topic, but have different expectations when it comes to call records. And again, a lot of that is driven from I'm on Cisco, I'm on Avaya, I'm on some existing cloud UCaaS platform. So they have a set of expectations that come with what they currently own or what your organization currently has access to. And so I kind of put together a little bit of a left and a right here on when it might fit your organization, when it might not fit your organization. We'll talk through these real quick, but it's important just to call out that if you're a traditional phone administrator, maybe you're your team's administrator, that's great. I'm glad you have that experience and you have the focus and the interest and the curiosity around the call records itself. This solution itself leverages components that are deployed within Azure. So this is the opportunity to include either resources from your organization that might already be familiar with the Azure components that they're managing today, maybe resources that are familiar with Graph API and how to connect with Graph API, and kind of a willingness to kind of work with the raw records themselves, right? And then you'll see as we get into the demonstration, it's super important that you understand the structure of the records, because as I mentioned, right, the insights come from the logic that you might build around your query sets, around maybe some dashboarding that you want to put together. Those insights, Call Record Insights provides the flat data, and you have to kind of drive the insights through logic. So having folks that are familiar with KQL or Custo database, Cosmos database on the backside, is important. So this is the opportunity when it fits on the left-hand side. Consider pulling those resources into the conversations if you're getting started with Call Record Insights, or if it's a place that you want to develop more capabilities with. Include your Azure kind of folks to help you guide you along the way. On the right-hand side, I've got a little bit of when it might not fit. And when I put the little asterisk there next to customer needs immediate solution, as I mentioned before, this takes 15 to 20 minutes to deploy. The immediate component is really around deriving insights from the data that gets out there. And so if you're looking for something that's going to produce an immediate visualized dashboard for you that's going to tell you what's going on, this solution requires you to develop logic to drive insights out of it. And so it's just, I wanted to kind of call out that you may, if you're looking for a kind of a point and click dashboarding type solution, we'll maybe later on in the deck, I've got a couple links for third-party solutions that might meet those needs. Do a quick just screenshot here in a little bit to kind of show you some of the costs associated, but roughly the cost to deploy call record insights. Again, it's not a license you buy, but there are costs associated with the Azure components you deploy. And the most, I guess I would say, costly component is that Azure Data Explorer piece. So as I mentioned before, call records are per stream, not per call, and we'll show you what that looks like, but it's important just to think about in cloud-based telephony and meeting solutions, collaboration solutions, right? We have all sorts of different streams, video streams, audio streams, and screen sharing streams or data streams when we do screen sharing like we're doing today. So we'll take a look at what that looks like, but I just want to be very clear to call out those kind of differences that you might see. And then we'll talk a little bit more when we get into the examples of call E to call to call E, and what the organizer ID is kind of used for in a call record. One second, this is where I'm going to pivot real quick. So I'm going to stop sharing, and then, Don, I'm going to need you guys probably to reshare, but I just wanted to kind of jump to what the deployment example looks like. So I'm going to stop sharing here. And I'm going to share my screen. Give me one moment. Since we're not going to go through a live deployment today, provide a little bit of a view of the scripting variables, if you will, that get defined to make the deployment work, right? And we can clone the repository. We can download the zip file from the GitHub itself. And literally, to get started, on the screen here, we've just got a few individual variables that need to get defined, name of your resource group, your subscription, the domain you're attempting to deploy records to, which Azure resource location you want to deploy to. And the simplicity of it is we deploy the script with the parameters, and you're going to get a screen that, sorry if this is a little blurry, it's going to look a little bit like this, where it's going to walk through 15 to 20 minutes. And you'll see the successful activities that take place during the deployment. Once it's done, you're going to get green notification, just noted at the bottom here, of deployment complete. And then within your Azure portal, under your resource group, for your call records deployment, you're going to see all of the different components that get deployed. As I mentioned before, we've got a storage account, Data Explorer cluster, the different components. You'll see that they get deployed successfully. And I just wanted to kind of give you at least a little bit, I have this link to this larger blog post that this is taken care of to help you get a little bit more familiar. It's in the slide deck itself. We can provide it in chat too later on or in the follow-ups. But if you want to get kind of more familiar with what the deployment looks like and some easy guidance on how to get started, I put some of that together here in a blog post for you. All right, Don, does it make sense for me to share, or do you guys want to reshare back into the PowerPoint itself?
Yeah, if you can do it, no big deal.
No, all right, thank you.
I already did it, and hang on. There we go.
There we go.
Go ahead and take over.
Yep, I got it. I just threw this slide in here real quick to just make sure that everybody is also aware that while we, think about access to records and what's in a record, it's also important to be familiar with kind of security of the data that's being stored there, right? And Call Record Insights pulls information from the Graph API into, a Cosmos database that you and your organization, once deployed, are responsible to manage. The beauty and the value of that is the fact that you have access to the records in your database, and you have the opportunity to manage the security around that database itself, who has access to it, who doesn't have access to it. Do you want to trim your records or provide more or less retention? there's a lot of value in the capability, but with that value comes the responsibility of being a little bit more security mindset focused. So there's a link here on kind of how Kusto or how Cosmos database takes advantage of role administration and so forth. So if we think about what's in a call record, right, there can be some sensitive information, if you will, the phone number itself, IP addresses, end user usernames, and UPNs in those type of scenarios. So just be mindful that once you pull and deploy call record insights, you and your organization are then responsible for securing your database and putting the controls around access and retention. So on this slide, right, a little bit of an eye chart here, but we'll definitely get back into it. Once we deploy call record insights, there's a couple different ways that we have to gain access to the Azure Data Explorer cluster. In this example, I'm just kind of showing you a very simplified Kusto query language query, similar to SQL, but we're using KQL with the Cosmos database. And in the screenshot here, you can just see a very simplified example of all of the different fields. In a few more slides, I'm going to pivot more into kind of a live demonstration where we'll be able to scroll to the left and the right. As I was talking with Andy and Justin and Jonathan and Don earlier, being that there are roughly 240-ish fields potentially available across any singular record, it's really hard to kind of display the database itself on a singular screen. So try to provide some screenshot examples and we'll dive into what that looks like. But in this example here, right, we can take those 240-ish fields and through a simplified query, just produce the visual information that we're interested in. So for instance, we may not be interested in some of the call health metrics, and we might be more interested in start time, stop time, call duration, what's the directionality of the call, et cetera. And so I just want to be kind of transparent here that the database is going to hold up to 240 fields if Graph API can produce, depending on the call modality. And then you have the ability through the intelligence of a query to refine the results of what's in the database to what you might be used to seeing. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. It's just an example of how we can modify the query structure to only produce what we're looking for. And so in this particular query example, again, this is just one that I put together. I tend to use this type of query pretty regularly when I'm kind of culling through my records to produce the things that we want to produce. So let's just grab a laser pointer here. In this query, right, we define the database that we're querying. In this case, it's called call records. Using KQL, I get a little bit creative here and I say, look, just show me what was produced, the stream records that were produced in the last 24 hours. So we use the where statement here. Call end time and a go is 24 hours. And then in my scenario or an example that I have, I want to produce the duration of a call. Call record insights starts with call start time and call end time. I want to know what the duration is. So I just do a little bit of mathematical query in this to extend the call duration. It's optional, not required, but it basically calculates how long was the call based on the call start time and call end time. The extend statement allows us to do the calculation that we just talked about, and then project gives us the capability of saying we're going to project call ID, session ID, the direction of the stream itself, and some of the other important fields, like for instance, the caller user display name, maybe the telephone number that's provided. We'll talk a little bit more about when user display name is important versus when caller or callee phone ID is important, because not always are those fields populated. And then we just do a statement at the bottom that says sort by call start time descending, right, to give me the oldest to newest records. And I just provided, like, for example, at the bottom here, we could do an option to add a where media label equals main audio. And what that does for us is remove any stream records from the query that represent video streams or screen sharing streams, which are present in meetings and conference calls. So just an example of kind of how you can use the intelligence of KQL to kind of call and manage the data down to what might be important to you and your organization. So I've deployed call record insights. I'm gathering data as every call is processed and works through the event hub into the Cosmos database. how do I get access to these different things, right? And so I'll show you a little bit more when we jump to kind of the live or the interactive demo, but a couple recommended ways, right through the web access from the Azure portal. For those that aren't familiar, ADX, Azure Data Explorer, there's a web interface that allows you to gain access and start using KQL queries against the database. Kusto Explorer is an application that you can install. It's my personal favorite. I tend to use Kusto Explorer, and I'll show you what that looks like a little bit more, but just a couple reference links here. There's also PowerShell libraries that can be developed if you're going to do some more automation and scripting. And then really, most importantly, especially if you're a traditional phone person, maybe not as familiar with the database language of Kusto query language, get familiar with the analysis and the power and the capabilities in KQL. While it's very similar to SQL, there's just a lot of optimization to do in-query calculations, as I showed you before, with like call duration, that you can do right within the query itself, as opposed to having to do large database manipulation and so forth. So, all right, I am going to maybe I'll pause for a second. Anything in the chat questions-wise that we might need to surface, Don, or I'm going to jump over to a live demo if now is the right time.
I think you're fine. Looks like Justin is working through a question, so I think we're good.
Cool. And Justin, Andy, anything you guys want to add or throw in that I didn't get a chance to cover in the?
Yeah, I just dropped a link. We do provide an example dashboard that you can deploy to sort of get you started with Kusto. You can look at all of the queries and sort of the visualizations in Kusto. I dropped a link for everybody if they want to explore that.
Thank you. Nice. I'm going to jump back to my screen here. Hopefully this is fluid for everybody in the meeting and in the recording itself. So we talked a little bit about kind of how to gain access. And one of the things that I just wanted to kind of show real quick is when we're in our Azure portal, we find the resource group that we deployed our call record insights to. Here's all the different components that are part of. Oh, yep. Thank you.
Yeah, you're presenting your teams.
No red box. Thanks for catching that, Don.
Yep. Not that anybody wants to see your chats, but
that was fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's doing it again.
It's still doing it again. Why? I'm going to screen, but for some reason it's not. Let's try this again. Let's do window. All right. How's that? Better?
Yes, much better.
All right. Thank you. So we jumped into our Azure portal. We found the resource group for our call records deployment, and here are all the different components, as I mentioned. We talked a little bit about what are some ways to start to access the data. The first thing I'd just like to show, if you're not familiar with Azure Data Explorer, once we get the Azure Data Explorer selected, we can grab the URI right from here. And if we throw the URI into a browser, once we authenticate, we now have access through Azure Data Explorer to start viewing the records. This is one way to get to the access. Real simple query to get started. Call records, take 100. For those that are familiar with KQL, very simple. Give me the latest 100 records that are deployed or populated into the database. And we can see, as again I mentioned, it's kind of maybe hard to show on the screen, but we get an immediate response from Azure Data Explorer cluster that gives us all of the different fields of information. This is kind of uncurated. We'll dive a little bit more into the field examples here, but I just kind of wanted to give you this first example of how quick and easy it is to kind of get access and start looking at the different record types. I will pivot to Kusto Explorer, since I like to use that to save my queries, and I've got them teed up in tabs and so forth, but just wanted to show you, here's a quick and easy way to get access to the records themselves. As I mentioned before, I like to use Kusto Explorer. You can kind of see this is just a downloadable application, Microsoft app that you can deploy, no cost to it. And so very similar to the Azure Data Explorer web browser, we get a query window where we can develop a window and then get the record access to. We can save these different queries if we want to. And in this particular example, I provided call records where last 24 hours. And in this case, I provided an additional filter set that said, just show me where my where my call type is peer-to-peer, right? So that basically is filtering out meeting type records, right? And then I give it the sort by call start time. I'm going to jump over to Excel here in a minute because, I just noticed my screen is not pivoting again. Yeah. Apologies all. All right, one moment. There we go. So in Kusto Explorer, again, downloadable, installable. Apologies for the hiccup there. We've got a couple different query sets, some tabs here that I've created. And in these tabs, again, you can see all of the different data, but as we work through the different query types, we have a very flattened set of records here with all kind of 240 some odd fields populated. Some are blank. For instance, in the call type where we have a peer-to-peer call or a PSTN call, there is no join or web URL. Successful calls, there is no failure reason. So I just want to be clear that different call types, depending on the connect format, whether it be a meeting or a call, whether it be from a Teams client, an Android-based client, a phone, or the PSTN itself, different fields can be captured and then recorded into the database. If the field is blank, it means that the modality provided was not able to populate that particular record, or again, maybe in the case of a failure, there wasn't a call failure. I showed you in the static view before. This is a view in which I've provided more detailed information, right? So I want to produce call duration in a calculation. I want to sort by only the audio calls. So we put in where media label equals audio. And in this particular example, I've done a little bit of additional documentation to pull in a UPN from another table. So over here on the left-hand side, actually, I can just do this real quick. I provided a simple lookup table that says, here's all my users in my tenant. Here is their GUID. And here's the user principal name. This isn't required, but I just wanted to show you the flexibility that you can get so that if you want to pull in the UPN into the record, now I can do a lookup based on the GUID. And right here, I've got UPNs when available. So, again, this just kind of demonstrates once you have the records in a database that you manage, there's a lot of flexibility that you can do yourselves within your organization to drive insights, drive more information. And then, if you have never used Kusto Explorer before or Azure Data Explorer, right within the query, you could do derived charting. So in this particular example, I've basically said, hey, show me all my records by day and tell me how many records I have per day, right? And so I just rendered the time chart statement here. You can see in the bottom portion of the KQL query, and Kusto Explorer shows you, a time chart for all the new records. Another example of that is show me the average duration of my calls. So again, we do call duration, some calculations, we render the time chart in the query, and now we've got kind of a live interactive, if you will, right from Kusto Explorer. We'll talk a little bit more before we get to the end on, there's different solutions out there. Call Record Insights gives you access to the flat records. For those of you that have been using Teams for a while, we have, the CQD and QER capabilities built into Power BI. So you likely would not be doing a lot of visualizations inside Kusto Explorer itself. Likely you're going to pop to CQD and QER in Power BI to give you insights on call health. That stated, you notice in the example, let's go back here. There is call health information captured in Call Record Insights. Jitter, the same data that's provided to CQD and QER can be available and surfaced through Call Record Insights. So we've got our round trip times, average audio, network delay, those type of things, right? So I don't know, Andy, Justin, if you guys have any comments on kind of when Call Record Insights should be used for media health versus, or maybe even Mary Beth Kirk who's on. Sometimes there's a right tool when, and this is the tool to get you access to the records. But for those that like the visualization around call health, I'd for sure recommend attending Matt Wade's session later on, where we're going to get deeper into CQD and QER using Power BI. Okay, one more pivot here. Give me 1 second. I'm going to break down the structure of a record. And I'm going to do this in Excel because it's a little easier to navigate in Excel. So what I did was I used Custo Explorer to find a couple call types, basically to give you, to be able to break down kind of some of the examples. So in this case, you can see from the Excel, I've got an outbound PSTN call, an inbound PSTN call, and a user-to-user call. This is based on the query that I provided. So I simplified the query, not pulling in the full record. But as you can see here, there's the rounded call duration you can get. Notice there's 2 rows for each record. That's important because we have directionality of each call itself, inbound and outbound directionality. When we can display the caller user display name, so in this top row, outbound PSTN, you'll notice I've got the callee phone number here, but I don't have a UPN, and that's because on a PSTN outbound call, we don't know what the callee's UPN is. All we know is the dial digits or the phone number that was dialed, and therefore the callee fields are left blank, whereas the caller fields are populated. In this case, my lobby phone dialed an 800 number, so we can see that the caller UPN is populated by using that additional query set. The user display name is populated because we know that from the tenant. The same kind of falls true when we look at the next row, which is the inbound PSTN record, right? We can see we've got the caller phone number, right? And then we've got, but the UPN and caller user display name is blank, whereas in who answered the call E is notified as our lobby phone. And in a user-to-user call, we get both sides because we're within the tenant, so we know both UPNs, or in this case, user display names. And so we got Megan Bowen and Irvin Sayers identified. To give you a quick differentiated view, this set of query examples used the query where I limited the number of fields. I'm not going to exhaust the whole table set here, but as I scroll to the right, I mentioned 240 some odd potential fields. Developing that logic against the database fields that you're most interested in and writing your query to help you find what's most interesting for you is really the critical component. So as we talk about how to get started, get yourself deployed, start getting familiar with the records, and then get yourself familiar with the KQL so that you can filter out the things you don't need or the things that are blank so that you don't have to deal with all of the different fields that might be blank or might not be needed. And lastly here, I wanted to kind of give you a quick example of a meeting. And as we mentioned, meetings are a little bit more complex because we might have multiple people that join meetings and they might join at different times. So in this example here, the call ID field is consistent across all joinees, right? If we notice this GUID notified for call ID is consistent, whereas our session ID fields are different based on who joined, when they joined, and what modality did they join from. You can see where we have media labels here for main audio, data for screen sharing. In this particular example, I don't see video, so there probably was no video camera sharing in that. And then you get the directionality. And again, we've got start and stop times and so forth. But you'll also notice there's meeting join IDs. When we can get the information about the codec and the round trip delay and all of the media statistics, that'll be populated. But a meeting is the same record. It just has much more entries because there's more streams involved in a multi-person meeting. All right, I'm going to stop sharing and we're going to kind of pivot. Any questions that we've got out there that we haven't been able to get to?
Now it looks like Jake or Justin and Andy are answering them.
Nice. I appreciate it. Andy, Justin, anything you wanted to add that I might not have been able to cover there, or any experiences you've had with either customers or other folks that have been asking?
No, you're nailing it.
All right, cool. Well, that's good.
Just to hop on there, Jeff, you've been doing great. I think the only thing I would add is as you indicated to start, this is very much a solution where it's very raw data. So, gathering the information you want from a reporting perspective is going to be limited by your imagination. and your ability to correlate with other data sources and the like. But to that end, it's empowering you with the data at your fingertips and giving you the ability to do it with with full control of that scope, as opposed to being limited by what's made available to you and other means of access.
Awesome, thanks. I'm going to jump back into our deck real quick. Give me 1 second here. All right. We're going to jump to a slide that's just got some helpful links. If I give it a second here for PowerPoint Live to do what I want it to do. Pick up where we left off. Okay. So some helpful links here for those that haven't maybe been able to get started. Again, quick blog post I referenced earlier on kind of how to get started, how to work through the deployment script. Really, most importantly, the GitHub itself has all of the required documentation and deployment guidance that Andy and Justin put together. I did want to kind of make a reference to the fact that there have been some other efforts, community developed efforts out there. I just kind of often get customers looking for maybe something that's just, I want a PowerShell script to do something, right? If you're interested in more of just a PowerShell script to do something, you can take a look at the Lee Ford get PSTN records. I want to be super clear that it's really more of a direct routing focused scenario. It's not quite as enriched, and it doesn't do the flattening and the database flattening that was that Andy and Justin and team have put together. So it's super important to kind of call out some of those differences in what you get from a PowerShell script versus what Call Record Insights gets you is already database access. All you have to do is start writing queries to develop those insights. And then earlier on in the conversation, when I kind of referenced when might this fit your organization versus when might this not fit your organization, on that right-hand side, if you're looking for something that's a little bit more purpose-built or already built dashboarding, things like that, there are some third-party options that reference capabilities to get into Call Record Insights. The important part there is that their solutions, require different integrations, require different permissions, and have different controls around retention of those records, how long you may be able to store those records, and so forth. So I just want to be kind of clear that while there are third-party options out there, Call Record Insights is where you have kind of full control over everything. The third-party options might require licensing, might have limitations on how long the third-party solutions out there between Cloba and Analytics 365 and so forth. So for sure, these third-party options might be worth getting into, but I recommend getting Call Record Insights deployed, getting familiar with the records, as Andy just pointed out, right? And then starting to get familiar with like KQL and how you can really, kind of extract those records and start to develop, insights for your organization on directionality of calls, who's using, who's not using, when are PSTN calls being made, when are meetings being made. And then as I referenced before, I've got one last little slide here where I just kind of wanted to show a quick example. If wanted, you can connect Power BI into your Azure Data Explorer cluster and start to develop your own visualizations. Fine line between when you might want to develop your own visualizations versus when you might want to use CQD and QER that Matt Wade and others are going to cover later on this afternoon. Mary Beth and I have covered the topic before, and a couple of the CSAs. Up to you on when you might want to do that, but it is possible to do a direct query in Azure Data Explorer and start to produce your own charts and things like that in Power BI connected to your Azure Data Explorer cluster. All right, that was really all I had from a content perspective. Glad to hang out for a little bit, finish answering questions in chat. Andy, thanks for referencing cost controls, Call Record Insights. I could probably do this real quick. Let me just share a screen. I'm going to share my cost screen for you just to give you a rough idea. One moment.
While he's pulling it up, I just wanted to throw out there, I know that our Graph API team has been working to make some extensions to the call records objects, which add some other fields like UPN data and display name. I think I mentioned in the chat. Those currently are not in Call Record Insights, but will be coming in a pending update. We're essentially getting the update process itself ironed out just to make sure you have a way forward if you've already deployed. But to that end, and any feature requests or what have you, any sort of that activity, just bring it as an issue within the GitHub repository, and we can have a discussion about value add and if it's something we can do, and see where we can go from there. But we are planning on trying to release an update here in the coming weeks that will extend those fields. But as mentioned in the chat, Jeff's solution of joining with your own data set within Kusto is the most fail-safe way to do it, because there are still certain scenarios where those fields won't be populated.
Yeah, great, Andy. I appreciate you kind of making that clarification. While in my demonstration, I'm showing user UPN in there. That's because I did the join because I wanted to do that, and it's just something specific. Most importantly, there, it's really kind of cool to call out that once you have the data, you can do joins and database management on your own and pull in other organizational information if you wanted to, right? So that was really the value of kind of showing that UPN information. Super good to hear you guys are going to incorporate it into from the Graph API perspective. Real quick, just on cost management, apologies, right? This is demo information, so you'll notice many days have no cost associated with them, and that's just because I've implemented some cost savings, turn my database down if not in use, right, kind of thing. But the important part really just to kind of is we take one of the most costly days in the environment, right? Roughly, I put $25. I think this kind of flattens out as you get to scale. There are other days when there are probably less, $17, whatever, but it's just important that you can also see, how much this is potentially costing your organization. Shouldn't cost much compared to what you might be paying in third-party licensing. And again, it's just really components that are within Azure. The most costly component really is that Kusto cluster. You'll notice there's a couple other things in here for the storage account and so forth.
Jeff, your share is not working for some reason, and your videos seems to be frozen. But our audio's still going.
Interesting. I do have a red box around my screen today. Maybe I need to do an update.
And are you still there, Jeff? And I think we lost him.
All right. Well, maybe Justin and Andy, we might bring you on to answer some of the questions. There was a great one from Stefan. What insights do they provide beyond call records?
Sure thing. I mean, to that end, ultimately the insights are what you derive from it. The big takeaway from the solution itself is it's taking those hierarchical objects like Jeff showed in the beginning, they're very nested, and puts it into a tabular format that's more actionable from a query perspective. It allows you to make more to use a common common language that you might be familiar with from other aspects, but it allows you to make those discoveries upon your own. We're not actually doing anything from a data perspective in terms of decorating. Essentially, we're just putting it into a form that allows you to do that in a more straightforward manner with what is, with the tools that are made available to us today.
Awesome. Thank you, Andy. Appreciate that. Any other questions that we may have missed along the way, or things that we want to re-highlight? This is a great presentation, pretty in-depth, a lot of key information. So if you have a question, post it in the chat. Otherwise, we'll start to wrap it up.